So, welcome back to Rockabyes, and this episode is called Michael Jackson, the Architect of the Groove. And we're going to do a deep dive on Thriller and the making of Thriller, behind the music of Michael Jackson. So before the moonwalk, before the white glove, before the mythology that would surround his life, there was a musician. And long before the world saw Michael Jackson as a global icon, he was something else entirely, a student of music. And as a boy, he stood backstage, as I said in earlier episodes, watching James Brown and Jackie Wilson and studying them. But Michael didn't just admire them, he analyzed them. He wanted to understand how the music worked, how a song could make people move, how a groove could change the energy of a room, how a voice could carry emotion behind words, beyond words. By the early 1980s, that curiosity had evolved into something bigger, and Michael wasn't just recording songs anymore. He was imagining them first, hearing the bass lines, the drum patterns, the melodies, and then building them layer by layer, rhythm by rhythm, sound by sound, and you'll be able to see Janice. And by the way, Janice is back with me. Thank you, Janice, for being back with me.
Ready for back.
And nowhere was that process more visible than in the creation of one album that would be Thriller. More than 40 years later, Thriller is still the best-selling album in history, but the real story of the record isn't just its success, it's how it was built, because the sessions that produced Thriller reveal something essential about Michael Jackson, not just as a performer, but as a creator. Inside the studio, surrounded by some of the greatest musicians and producers in the world, Michael Jackson was developing a method, a blueprint for how he imagined, built, and perfected music. And once you understand how that process worked, you begin to understand why Thriller changed pop music forever. And right quick, you don't have to tell me your favorite song in Thriller, but what is one of your favorite Michael Jackson songs? You were talking about it earlier.
Okay. Oh, I Said The Way You Make Me Feel is one of them.
The video was great too.
The whole Bad album is just
one of your favorites.
And I know maybe I get my Michael card taken away because my favorite songs are not on Thriller. But
they're on Bad. A lot of his songs I liked on Bad and Dangerous.
I love the later Rebel Michael.
Yes, Teddy Riley was the producer on that. Bad, Quincy Jones did come back. But one of my favorites is, I do love Smooth Criminal, like we were talking about. I still play Smooth Criminal. We talked about Remember the Time. That was a jam.
So good.
That was the jam.
So
that
good.
was New Jack City.
Yes.
New Jack City
Yes.
sound. Teddy Riley. We could do a deep dive on that another time. But anyway.
That was great. Yeah, when Michael Jackson walked into the studio, he didn't just assemble a band. He assembled what many musicians quietly referred to as the A-Team. At the center of that team was producer Quincy Jones, one of the most respected musical minds in the industry. Jones had worked with everyone from jazz legends to film orchestras, and he'd understood something crucial about Michael. If they were going to make great records, they needed the very best people in the room. So the studio quickly filled with extraordinary talent. Equally essential was recording engineer Bruce Sweden, a towering figure in studio engineering. With his walrus mustache and a warm personality, he became a constant presence throughout Michael's solo career. Long before working with Michael, he'd already built an extraordinary resume, recording the Chicago Symphony Orchestra professionally at just 21. Something. And engineering the Grammy-winning hit Big Girls Don't Cry by the Four Seasons. Over the years, he worked with legends such as Count Basie, Duke Ellington, Benny Goodman, and Herbie Hancock, which, amazing.
Yes.
Quincy Jones often said that Sweden possessed one of the finest pairs of ears in the business, and those ears helped shape the shimmering sonic landscape that defined Michael Jackson's recordings. But beyond the core production team, the sessions were filled with elite musicians, players who were already legends. On bass was Louis Johnson, nicknamed Thunder Thumbs from the brothers Johnson. His deep rhythmic playing powered many of the grooves that would become signature Jackson moments. Drums were often handled by John Robinson, whose crisp precision gave the music its heartbeat. Keyboardist Greg Phillinganes, a classically trained musician, added rich harmonic layers and synthesizer textures that became essential to Michael's sound. Brazilian percussion master Paulino da Costa brought dazzling rhythmic colors drawn from jazz, Latin, and world traditions. Guitarist Melvin Wawa Watson added funk and soul textures, while trumpeter Jerry Hay and the CUN horns created the powerful brass arrangements that lifted many of the recordings into another dimension. Members of the band Toto were also key contributors to the sessions. Members of the band Toto were formed by elite Los Angeles studio musicians, including David Paich, Steve Lukather, Jeff Porcaro, Steve Porcaro, and the group had already become some of the most in-demand session players in the industry. During the same period that Thriller was being recorded, their album Toto 4, featuring hits like Rosanna and Africa, was dominating the charts. Love that song.
I still listen to Africa. And by the way, rest in peace to Jeff Porcaro, because he died very early on. I think it was like some little heart thing, but he was one of the most incredible drummers ever.
Really?
Yeah, so having him in the studio was like you had made it if you have Jeff Porcaro as your session musician. He was almost like Dwayne Allman of the Allman Brothers. He was a very much in-demand guitarist, but sorry.
No, that's great. And sometimes the appearances were even more unexpected. Rock guitar legend Eddie Van Halen famously stopped by the studio to record the blazing solo, Beat It.
Yep.
Creating one of the most iconic pop rock crossovers in music history. I think it might be.
And he only did it in like 1 or 2 takes.
I'm not surprised by that.
Yeah, totally.
There were also musicians whose contributions were less widely known. Percussionist Sheila E., love Sheila E., quietly played during the Thriller sessions. Her work didn't receive an official credit on the album sleeve, but she still receives royalty checks today, a small but telling reminder of just how many extraordinary musicians passed through those sessions. And alongside these instrumentalists were some of the most accomplished songwriters in the industry. Yet despite all the star power, one thing continued to impress Quincy Jones the most: Michael himself.
Yeah.
That says so much.
Yeah, and I want to say in regards to Sheila E., she just told that story to Sean Stockman of the Boys to Men, because he has a podcast, and she was on it, and she said it, and we were like, what? I think even he went, what? And she was like, yeah, she played percussion on Thriller. She came in and did it.
Bad Mama Jamma right there.
It is.
Michael Jackson was surrounded by extraordinary musicians, but he was also part of a remarkable circle of songwriters. And one of the most important writers in that circle was Michael himself. Some of his most iconic songs, including Billie Jean, Beat It, and Don't Stop Till You Get Enough, came directly from his own imagination. These weren't simply vocal performances. Michael often arrived with the entire structure already forming in his mind, like Mel mentioned a couple episodes ago.
Yeah.
He had a unique way of describing this process. Michael sometimes said songwriting didn't feel like inventing something new. It more felt like discovering something that already existed. He always said the music was already there. In that sense, Michael wasn't just writing songs, but he also thrived in collaboration. One of the most important creative partners in his orbit was songwriter Rod Temperton, a member of the British funk disco band Heatwave. Temperton had a remarkable gift for melody and structure. Producer Quincy Jones once described him as one of the finest songwriters he had ever encountered, someone whose instincts for melody resembled those of a classical composer. Musically, Temperton and Michael were a natural fit. Both were fascinated by the atmosphere and mystery of nightlife, the glow of dance floors, the drama of late-night city streets, the sense of fantasy music could create after dark. Yet both of them were far more comfortable writing about those worlds than actually living them. Michael later said that Temperton felt like a kindred spirit. According to Quincy, he wrote more than 30 potential songs for the album, many of them complete with bass lines, counter melodies, and even multiple alternate titles. In fact, Temperton would go on to write 3 of the album's defining tracks: Thriller, Baby Be Mine, and The Lady in My Life. Jones and Jackson also welcomed songs from far beyond their immediate circle. Writers like Paul McCartney, Stevie Wonder, Carol Bayer Sager, and David Foster all moved through the creative orbit surrounding Michael's surroundings. Yet even when working with celebrated writers, Michael played a distinctive role. He didn't simply sing the songs, he reshaped them. Rhythms tightened, melodies shifted, phrasing evolved. By the time Michael stepped into the microphone, the song often felt transformed, something unmistakably his, like the moonwalk.
Yes.
And as these collaborations unfolded, the songs that would become Thriller began to take shape.
People who worked with Michael in the studio, actually, often say the same surprising thing. For someone who would become one of the most famous people on the planet, he was remarkably gentle. Recording engineer Bruce Sweden remembered that Michael rarely raised his voice in the studio. If he needed something adjusted in his headphones, he didn't bark orders across the control room the way some stars did. Instead, he would quietly lean towards the microphone and say something like, "Could I hear a little more piano in the earphones, please?" And when the change was made, they would always have the same simple response: "Thank you." A lot of people need to do that. You're Michael Jackson, and if he can be polite,
Just a person.
people in the industry are not that way, everybody, even with all the stuff he had to deal with. In a studio world not always known for humility, Sweden never forgot that. That gentleness, however, existed alongside an extraordinary work ethic. Before recording vocals, Michael often trained with legendary vocal coach Seth Riggs for 2 full hours. If a vocal session was scheduled for noon, Michael was frequently in the studio by 10 in the morning, already warming up. While engineers checked cables and adjusted microphones, he stood in the room running scales, patiently working through exercise designed to stretch his voice to its limits. Riggs trained him using a technique called speech-level singing, a method that allows singers to extend their natural range without strain or sudden break between registers. The results were extraordinary. Riggs said Michael could move across nearly 4 octaves from deep bass tones to notes above high C, and many listeners assumed these soaring highs were falsetto, but Riggs insisted they weren't. It was one connected voice. Yet range alone didn't explain the power of Michael Jackson's voice. What truly set him apart was expression. It could be warm and romantic in songs like I Can't Help It, that's one of my favorites too. Playful and exuberant in The Way You Make Me Feel, and fragile and vulnerable in Childhood, or gritty and explosive tracks like Scream. Sometimes the most emotional moments didn't involve words at all. Michael treated sound itself as a language. The gulps, gasps, cries, hiccups, and exclamations that punctuate his recordings weren't accidents. They were rhythmic choices inspired in part by the vocal style of James Brown. Michael understood instinctively that the human voice could function like a percussion instrument. Those sounds became part of the groove, part of the pulse that made his music feel alive. Musicians who worked with Michael often talk about something else he possessed, something harder to explain. They call it the pocket. Do you know what the pocket is? I learned myself. In music, the pocket is the perfect rhythmic space where everything locks together, bass, drums, and voice, and you're going to talk about the song that is really highlighted by that off of Thriller. Because Michael was a dancer first, rhythm came instinctively to him. He didn't simply sing on the beat, he sang inside it. You can hear it clearly in Billie Jean, which we talked about. Michael's voice doesn't float above the rhythm section. It becomes part of it, sitting right inside the groove. That's one of the reasons his music feels so irresistible. Your body responds to it before your mind even realizes it, which is the point of Jackie Wilson, what he talked about him. His approach to songwriting was just as unusual. Michael often described the creative process as if he were uncovering something that already existed. He once compared it to a sculpture, referencing Michelangelo, who believed a statue already lived inside a block of marble. The artist's job, Michelangelo said, was simply to free it. And then Michael Jackson believed that and felt that songs worked the same way. So when inspiration struck, he didn't necessarily run to the piano. Instead, he would grab a tape recorder and begin vocalizing the entire arrangement. The drums, the bass, the strings, the synthesizers, he could sing them all. Assistant engineer Rob Hoffman once recalled watching Michael walk into the studio with a song he'd written overnight. A guitarist was called in, and Michael began singing each chord tone for him, the first note, the second note, slowly building the structure until the musician understood exactly what Michael was hearing inside of his head. Because to Michael, music was like a tapestry, layers of rhythm. And other times it took months, even years before these layers aligned. If something didn't feel quite right, he simply stepped away and returned later, just trusting that the music would eventually reveal itself. The studio environment itself could feel almost theatrical, because he preferred recording with the lights turned off, believing that darkness helped dissolve the self-consciousness that can creep into a vocal performance.
So interesting.
Isn't that? The playback volume was often extremely loud, so loud that some musicians occasionally stepped outside and wore earplugs. And Michael rarely stood still while recording. He danced while singing, snapping his fingers and stomping rhythms into the floor. If the lyrics weren't finished yet, he would simply scat through the melody, inventing words and sounds until the emotional shape of the song began to emerge. So he went all Ella Fitzgerald on us.
That's making music that you feel in your body when you listen to it.
Exactly. During Thriller and Bad Sessions, the atmosphere could become even stranger. Michael occasionally brought animals into the studio. Bubbles would come in, his chimpanzee, wandering through the room, or his python muscles stretched across the warm control board. I know, much to the horror of Quincy Jones. Yet beneath the eccentric moments was something collaborators consistently remember, which is joy. Bruce later said that while working on Michael's recordings felt unlike any other session he had experienced. It wasn't just fun, it was just musical joy. Michael approached every project with curiosity, enthusiasm, and a deep belief in the magic of what they were creating together. And Quincy Jones noticed something else. Michael always arrived at sessions completely prepared. Lyrics, harmonies, phrasing, timing, everything already memorized. Studio time was incredibly expensive, and it still is, I think. But Michael moved through recordings with astonishing speed. In a single day, he might record 2 complete lead vocal takes and several background harmonies. So for a producer like Quincy, he once said, Michael was a dream artist. He walked into the room ready to record, and when someone with that level of preparation was surrounded by musicians of that caliber, something extraordinary began to happen. The songs began to take shape, not just as individual recordings, but as a cohesive musical. And as the sessions progressed, everything in the room began to sense the same thing. This wasn't just another album. We're building something big. But by the end of the 1970s, Michael learned something about the music business that troubled him deeply. In interviews before the release of Off the Wall, he spoke openly about the lack of respect and compensation historically given to Black artists in the industry. He admired the musicians who poured everything into their work, like Little Richard. He loved Little Richard too, who, as he put it, sweat and then go through hell bringing something into the world. Yet too often someone else came along and took the credit. That reality made Michael determined to protect his own future. He turned to his attorney, John Branca, with a clear request: make sure he received the credit and compensation he believed he deserved. Branca delivered, and soon after, Jackson renegotiated his contract with Epic Records, securing ownership of the master recordings for Off the Wall and Thriller, as well as his future albums. The deal also gave him the highest royalty rate in the industry at the time, 37%. In 1980, Jackson also created My Jack music catalog, which soon began accumulating an impressive collection of songs by artists such as Ray Charles, Jackie Wilson, and Sly Stone. But Michael's ambitions went far beyond contracts and catalogs. He had a vision for what his career would become. He told Branca he wanted to be the biggest star in show business and the highest paid recording artist in the world. The magazines, radio stations, television networks, and award shows that had once overlooked him, he said, will soon regret it. Michael refused to be marginalized. Thriller would not simply be the biggest selling album of all Black artists. Thriller would be the best selling album by any artist, more than Elvis, more than the Beatles, more than anyone. And as a lawyer, is that big, about 37%? Janice is a lawyer.
Yeah, I'm not a music lawyer, but 37% is great. And I mean, what's even more unheard of is just ownership in general.
Yes, and John could do it even back then.
Huge deal. And I mean, it's a game-changing move for an artist, especially an artist with a hit like that.
Yes, and he was young, and so was John. I mean, you know, when he came across that idea, and John, for everybody to know, helped him also negotiate to secure the rights to the music publishing of the Beatles catalog.
He did. You know, labels aren't rushing to lose ownership of songs, so.
Not even studios either. Well,
no, definitely.
Talking about sinners. Go ahead.
Shout out to Ryan Coogler.
Shout out to Ryan Coogler, yes.
Since recording of Thriller didn't officially start with Quincy Jones and the A-Team till 1982, the year 1981 is generally not included in accounts of Thriller, but it should be. Long before sessions started at Westlake Studio, MJ was quietly working on new material by himself. Quincy hadn't yet heard most of these songs. The producer and much of the A-Team were still in the middle of producing Donna Summer's next album, which would continue through the rest of the year. But Michael wasn't wasting any time. In a tape recording from that year, he can be heard dictating the structure of a new song. Let the song create itself, he reminds himself. Let the strings tell you what to do, where they should come. Let the piano tell you what chords to hit, whatever it feels. Let the bass tell you what it should be doing. Everything. Let it create itself. Let it form. Let it do what it wants to do. Don't force upon the song. Let the song force upon you. Let it tell you where to go. Then he works out the various parts of the song, the melody, the verses, the chorus, the bridge. He hums the strings and beatboxes the rhythm. The song was The Girl Is Mine, which Mel loves.
I love that song.
He wanted a song with a great melody.
The video was great, too.
It is a good video.
Song with Say, Say, Say.
He wanted a song with great melody, in part because he wanted a song like that on his album, but also because he knew he'd be singing the song with the great Paul McCartney.
Paul McCartney, yes.
Meanwhile, Michael continued to churn out demos for his own album. According to Quincy Jones, Michael was writing music like a machine during this period. He typically dictated song ideas into a tape recorder, as with The Girl Is Mine first, inventing beats and rhythms, imitating instruments, and humming melodies. Then he would flesh out the song further in the studio, sometimes with musicians or engineers, or sometimes with the assistance of his sisters or brothers. Not bad assistants to have.
Yeah, they did background vocals on it too.
He got to carry them into his solo career.
Like LaToya, I think, is on PYT. Like, na, 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 na. That's LaToya. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I love that.
Yeah.
That fall, Jackson was listening to Hall & Oates' new song, I Can't Go For That.
That was the jam.
Oh, can do. When inspiration stuck. He couldn't get that simple, stark drum beat and moody bass line out of his head. He wanted to write something similar but distinct. And a few days later, he said, this bass and this melody crept over me. The song was Billie Jean. Mm-hmm. Years later, during the recording of We Are the World, Jackson told Hall & Oates that their bass line on I Can't Go For That inspired his biggest hit. They were surprised by the revelation, as the songs are very different, but flattered in any event, and graciously complimented him on what he had done with it. Michael Jackson continued to work on Billie Jean for months. He knew he had something special and was determined to translate what he was hearing in his head as precisely as possible. On brand. He was so consumed by it that, as legend has it, he hardly noticed when his Rolls Royce caught fire on his way home from the studio one day. Recording engineer Nelson Hayes was driving as Michael Jackson sat in the back wearing headphones. They had just pulled off the Ventura Freeway from Los Angeles when a motorcyclist mentioned to roll down the window and pointed to the hood. Smoke was coming out. The driver pulled off to the side of the road and evacuated the car, but Michael Jackson remained so absorbed in the song, he hardly processed what was happening. Even while we were getting help in finding an alternate way to get where we were going, Michael recalled in his autobiography, I was silently composing additional material. Talk about being entirely consumed by your craft.
Yes, a burning car.
Look, you cannot interrupt greatness.
I guess not.
So the 1981 Billie Jean demo offers insight into Michael Jackson's evolving abilities as a songwriter. The lyrics aren't all there yet, and the chorus is in a different key, but all the main ingredients, the drum machine, the bass line, the verses, even the strings and guitar parts, were in place before he ever brought it to Quincy Jones and Bruce Sweden. And this was only the first iteration. As the song evolved, he brought in several musicians to help bring it to life. Tom Perry, who had worked on Triumph, helped handle the engineering. Bill Wolfer played the keyboard, Greg Phillinganes provided original bass, Jerry Hay contributed the synthesized strings, and Michael Jackson, meanwhile, played orchestrator and director, fleshed out the lyrics, and polished his vocals. This was often how he worked during pre-Westlake period. Early demos of songs like Wanna Be Startin' Something already had much of the final arrangement, including vocal shouts and the now famous chant that would close the track. By the time Quincy Jones heard many of these songs, the blueprint was already there. Quincy was surprised at how much progress had already made by the time that he finally turned his full attention to the album in 1982. For months, Jackson had been working quietly on new material. And by the time Quincy began listening seriously, Michael already had the beginnings of an album. Several strong songs that reflected exactly the sound he wanted to build, and now it was time for the real work to begin. More real work to begin.
Yes.
Because that's so much that heart that he put into that.
That's something.
It's something. He wanted to be starting something.
Yes.
Quincy Jones started sifting through the material that Michael had written while also reviewing potential songs for other writers. He had a quick method for evaluating them. He called it Polaroids. Each track was examined rapidly, almost like taking a snapshot to see if it contained the right elements. The tempo, the key, mood, emotional tone that would fit Michael's voice and the overall vision for the album. And only the strongest of those songs moved forward. Recording engineer Bruce later recalled that Michael would take the demos home, stay up all night listening to them, and return to the studio having memorized every note. By the time he stepped up to the microphone, he rarely needed lyric sheets or notes. Everything was already in his head, and as the team began narrowing down the material, the shape of the album slowly began to emerge.
He never used paper. Like, he just could go to the microphone, it's on his head.
She was a quick study, honestly.
Absolutely. He put the work into it. On April 14th, 1982, like she said, the real work began, actually officially began. Westlake itself played a role in the album's sound. The studio on Santa Monica Boulevard was larger and more advanced than the rooms where Off the Wall had been recorded, giving the team more space to experiment with arrangements and acoustics and the later production that would soon define the record, define Thriller. Inside Westlake, now listen to this, Janice. This is incredible. Inside Westlake Audio in LA, Michael, Quincy Jones, and their now famous A-Team musicians gathered to begin recording. But this was no ordinary music session. Also present that day, on April 14th, Paul McCartney, Beatles producer George Martin, and the Beatles engineer Jeff Emmerich began the first round of sessions for The Girl Is Mine. It lasted just 3 days, from April 14th to April 16th, but they accomplished something important. They completed The Girl Is Mine, and for the people in that room, the atmosphere was electric, because recording engineer Bruce later remembered that musicians kept dropping by the studio just to watch. Members of Fleetwood Mac, Dick Clark, came by. Everyone seemed to sense that something unusual was happening. I mean, David Page from Toto said that those early sessions as one of the most exciting moments of career, like looking at Paul McCartney and Michael sit around his piano.
How could it not be?
Exactly. The creation of Thriller was not without tension. When Off the Wall was recorded, Michael Jackson was still largely seen as a young artist, guided by Quincy. But by the time Thriller began, something had changed. Michael had spent nearly a year writing songs on his own, many of them already highly developed before Quincy even arrived in the studio. He came into the sessions not just as a singer, but as a songwriter and creative architect. And sometimes those ideas clashed with Quincy's approach. It's the start of something, guys. Jones still believed in casting a wide net for material, bringing in songs from outside writers to ensure the album had the strongest possible lineup. But Michael increasingly felt that many of his songs were already strong enough. One disagreement centered around PYT, Pretty Young Thing. Michael had written an earlier demo of the track, but Quincy ultimately decided to replace it with a new version written by James Ingram. I don't know if you know James Ingram.
I do.
Yes. Michael preferred his original version and was frustrated when it was set aside. So, there you go. Another tension involved songwriter Rod Temperton. Even though Michael loved Rod, whose work Quincy relied on heavily, Temperton had already contributed several songs, and Quincy continued encouraging him to develop more. One of those songs arrived under the title Starlight. Michael recorded a guide vocal, but something about it bothered him. The lyrics felt too light, too playful for the darker, more dramatic tone he envisioned for the album, alongside songs like Billie Jean and Wanna Be Starting Something. Temperton agreed the song needed a new concept. So one night he began brainstorming titles, writing down hundreds of possibilities before landing on a single word that captured the mood perfectly: Thriller. There you go. According to some collaborators, though, Michael himself helped push that transformation further, leaning into the horror movie imagery and theatrical storytelling that would eventually define the song and later the iconic music video. The music remained largely the same, but the atmosphere changed completely. The track became cinematic and eerie, more like a miniature horror film than a conventional pop song. And, Michael, that was another source of contention. I didn't put it in here, but he was irritated about the fact that he didn't get that credit that he wanted. To complete the effect, Quincy Jones invited legendary horror actor Vincent Price to record the spoken narration. You know who Vincent Price is.
Well, I know his voice very well.
Yes. Temperton wrote the now famous rap the day before the session, reportedly finishing the lyric during a taxi ride to the studio. When Price arrived at Westlake, he recorded the haunting monologue in just 2 takes. A moment like this defined the Thriller sessions. Michael's instincts, Quincy's discipline, Temperton's songwriting, but sometimes they pushed against each other, but together they built something extraordinary.
They did. And I mean, they were an A-team for a reason.
Yes.
And they knew immediately that Billie Jean would be one of the centerpiece tracks on Thriller, so they worked on it meticulously. Recording engineer Bruce later explained that their goal was to give the song the most unique sonic personality of anything they'd ever recorded, and that meant obsessing over the details. At one point, Michael recorded vocal overdubs while singing through a 5-foot cardboard tube, which created a slightly different acoustic texture.
I wonder which part of the song
I know, I wonder that too. I mean, have you ever sung through like a toilet paper tube or something? It really does add a texture.
Huh.
I hadn't thought about that.
I didn't until you just read it when I was thinking about it.
Yeah, of course he did. Drummer Ndugu Chancellor replaced the original drum machine pattern with a single continuous live drum take. To capture the sound properly, the engineers even built a special plywood platform for the drum kit, placing a kick drum microphone inside the structure to amplify the resonance. Meanwhile, bassist Louis Johnson tested nearly every bass guitar he owned before settling on a Yamaha instrument with the thick, buzzing tone Michael was hearing in his head. Wow. To match that perfectly was probably a task.
Wow.
Musicians often say this is where Michael Jackson's legendary pocket lived, the space in which a singer doesn't land on the beat, but settles inside the groove. And jazz musician Tom Scott contributed one of the track's most unusual textures, playing a lyricon, a wind-controlled analog synthesizer whose trumpet-like sound weaves subtly through the song.
It's crazy.
I love it. Even after all that, the perfectionism continued during the mixing stage. Bruce remembered reaching what he believed was a brilliant mix. He called Michael, Quincy, and songwriter Rod Temperton into the control room to listen. They loved it. Everyone was dancing, but then Michael quietly stepped out of the room, plotting.
Yes.
And motioned for Bruce to follow him. "Please, Bruce," he whispered. "It's perfect. But turn the bass up just a tiny bit and do one more mix." Bruce agreed. But Quincy had additional tweaks.
Oh, Lord.
By the time they finished experimenting, they had created 18 different mixes of the song. I'd be curious to hear them, too.
I know.
In the end, they went back and listened again to mix number 2. Everyone started dancing. That was the one. And that is the mix you hear on the record. If Billie Jean became the rhythmic heart of Thriller, another song would become its emotional soul. As the album continued to take shape, Quincy Jones was still searching for one more song that could bring a different emotional dimension to the record. He'd been asking David Paich from the band Toto to send over possible material. Eventually, David delivered a cassette of demos, but the song that caught Jones' attention wasn't even one Toto intended to submit. After side A of the cassette finished, the tape automatically flipped to side B, and that's when Quincy Jones heard a rough demo titled Human Nature.
That's one of my favorites.
It's one of my favorite songs.
It's
so I take
beautiful.
it back. One of my favorite Michael songs is
Human
Thriller
Nature.
album.
You're right. Yes.
The track was mostly unfinished. Only fragments of lyrics existed. Lines like, "If they say why," and "tell him that it's human nature." But the melody stops Jones cold. When he played it for Michael, the reaction was immediate. Michael later said that they both felt it was one of the most beautiful melodies that he had heard in a long time. Which
Toto.
it still is. Quincy Jones quickly called David to learn more about the song. And to his surprise, David explained that it wasn't his composition at all, actually. The track had been written by Toto keyboardist Steve Porcaro, who'd been inspired after talking with his daughter about a difficult day at school.
Yeah, she was a kid, and I think a little boy was like hitting her. And he said later that he told her, "It's because I think he likes you." You know, because that's why he was hitting her. And that's why he said he needed to explain to a little kid what that meant. And he said that's when he came up with
that way.
Yeah, why you do me that way, and it's human nature.
Wow. Well, the music was there, but the verses still needed lyrics. And for that, Quincy Jones brought in veteran songwriter John Bettis, known for his work with the Carpenters and Donna Summer. Bettis wrote the verses in just 2 days, and suddenly the song was complete.
And I read somewhere also that it could have been about John Bettis. He used to date Karen Carpenter.
Oh, did he?
Yes, and I think that it could have been inspired by her. Karen Carpenter, if people should listen to the Carpenters, the most beautiful voice, and inspired Mariah Carey, Whitney Houston, Luther Vandross. One of the Carpenter songs is what he recorded, Superstar.
I didn't know that.
That's a Carpenter song. Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. By November that year, every song on Thriller had finally been recorded. It only took the whole year. Michael Jackson and producer Quincy Jones had navigated months of experimentation, creative tension, and meticulous recording. Now they were racing towards the finish line. For the final week, the team worked almost nonstop, sometimes 18 hours a day, putting the last touches on the mixes.
It almost feels like you're doing a movie, too. I didn't know it took this much.
I mean,
I did not know.
We'll talk about it, I guess, another time, but All of the Lights by Kanye West featuring Rihanna, he said that song took a year to make.
Well, he had a lot of producers on it.
And you have that many opinionated, meticulous people.
And samples, probably.
Exactly. Clear.
But this is like...
The clearance is queen.
Right. And this is like from like an original source.
It is.
Like they built the instruments, you know.
It's personal to everyone, too.
Yes, absolutely.
When everything was finally ready, the core group gathered at the studio for the moment they had been waiting for. Michael, Quincy, Temperton, Bruce, and Michael's managers, Freddie DeMann and Ron Weisner. They sat down to listen to the completed album from beginning to end.
And by the way, one quick thing, Freddie DeMann, because of his work managing Michael Jackson, became Madonna's one of her big managers.
That's interesting because she's such a spectacle herself, too.
Yeah, she went and got Freddie DeMann. Freddie made his career probably, but...
Amazing. Quincy Jones later recalled the moment bluntly. It was a disaster. After all the great songs and performances, we had 24-karat sonic doo-doo. And Michael was devastated. Tears streamed down his face as the album played. He said, "I felt angry. I told my people, that's it. We're not releasing it. Call CBS."
He told John.
John, they're not getting this
They're
album.
not getting this album.
Michael understood something many artists learn the hard way. You can ruin a great record in the mix. It's like taking a great movie, he said, and destroying it in the editing.
That happens.
It does happen more often than you think.
Yes, take it from us. More often than you think. You can start, I've seen scripts that start out great. Yes, and then they create something 24 karat doo-doo.
And at that point, I mean, just like they did here, instead of releasing the album, they stopped the process entirely and began to fix it.
Yeah, and part of the problem was length. You know, Michael, this is something I learned as well. Michael loved long introductions and extended endings. Early versions of the album ran over 50 minutes, far longer than most vinyl records of the time. Isn't that funny? They had to think like vinyl records. Now, they're all like long and stuff. Something had to be trimmed. Several songs were carefully tightened. Both Human Nature and PYT were shortened by several minutes. Yeah, I just didn't think about it. Sections of Wanna Be Starting Something and Beat It were trimmed. Even the eerie interlude in spoken rap and Thriller had to be shortened. But the hardest decisions often involved Billie Jean. Quincy Jones and Michael clashed repeatedly over Billie Jean. Quincy suggested changing the title to Not My Lover, worried that people might confuse the name Billie Jean with tennis champion Billie Jean King, but Michael refused. Another disagreement centered on the now famous bass intro. Quincy thought it was too long. Quincy said, I told Michael we needed to get to the melody faster. The intro was so long you could shave during it. That's what Quincy said. But Michael wouldn't budge. That's the part that makes me want to dance, he said. And when Michael said something that made him want to dance, Quincy knew the argument was over. So on November 30th, 1982, Thriller finally arrived in record stores. And like we said in previous, both of us got it for Christmas. Even before the official release, radio stations had begun playing songs from the album, an unusual move at the time, and listener response was immediate. Then came the first single, Billie Jean. The song quickly climbed to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, becoming the biggest hit of Michael's career. While Billie Jean was still dominating the charts, Epic Records made another bold move. Instead of waiting months for the next single, they released Beat It. Industry insiders thought the strategy was reckless. They believed releasing another single so quickly would kill the momentum of the first. But Epic promotion chief Frank DeLeo, who became his manager after that, had a different prediction. Both songs he assisted would be #1, and he was right. Frank DeLeo was. Within weeks, Beat It replaced Billie Jean at the top of the charts. In fact, he said they screamed at him, "Are you crazy?" And he worked there. Over the next 2 years, Thriller became something more than just a successful album. It became a cultural phenomenon. It spent a record 80 weeks in the top 10 in the United States, 37 of them at #1. At its peak, the album was selling over 1 million copies per week. After Michael debuted the Moonwalk during Motown 25, sales exploded again. Later that year, the groundbreaking Thriller short film premiered and transformed the idea of what a music video could be. Soon it was everywhere: MTV, Showtime, even VHS home video. By then, the numbers were undeniable. Thriller had become the best-selling album in history, and decades later, it still is. At the 1984 Grammy Awards, Thriller won 8 Grammys in a single night, a sweep that confirmed what audiences around the world already understood. This was not just a successful album. It was a turning point in pop music, and it remains the most Grammys ever won by a single artist in one night.
I mean, what a record and what an accomplishment.
Yes.
And the real story of Thriller isn't just the sales numbers or the awards, it's the process. Long before the world heard the album, Michael Jackson was already building it in his imagination, singing the bass lines, the drum parts, the strings, the melodies. Inside the studio, surrounded by some of the greatest musicians in the world, Michael wasn't simply performing his songs. He was shaping them, layer by layer, sound by sound, until the music matched what he heard in his head. And in doing so, Michael didn't just create the biggest album of all time, he created a blueprint for how pop music could be imagined.
And thank you, Michael, for that. Because after Michael, everybody fashioned it. You know, he was one of a kind. He's simply put, one of a kind. And if anybody wants to know, there's a guy named Joseph Vogel who wrote a wonderful book called Man in the Music, The Creative Life and Work of Michael Jackson. Please go out and get this book. It is incredible. And he really breaks down his work. Like, I was so inspired. So thank you, Joseph, for writing such a wonderful book. And people should read it along with Moonwalk. And thank you so much for joining me, Janice. And to the King of Pop, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for coming. I mean, your family. You're Rockabyes family.
Rockabyes is so good.
And thanks to all the musicians like Toto. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Toto, but this was just one of my dream episodes to do anyway.
And you've introduced me to so many other musicians who were part of his journey.
Oh,
that helped to give more life and understanding for why his music was just so special.
That's amazing. Thank you. We'll do maybe another deep dive, maybe on Bad and the Teddy Riley one of Dangerous, because those frustrations really started rearing their head.
That.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks, bye.